Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, and today we are tackling something that I think affects literally every single one of us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, we're getting into the psychology of money because, you know, we often operate under this assumption that money is purely mathematical.
Oh, totally. Like it's physics or engineering.
Exactly. Like you have your income, you have your expenses, you calculate the yield on an investment, and boom, there's your answer. It's just a binary logical equation.
If only it were that simple.
Right. But then you look at actual human behavior, especially um, during periods of extreme economic uncertainty, and you quickly realize that pristine spreadsheet is completely useless.
Yeah, it just goes right out the window.
It really does.
Mhm.
Our financial logic simply evaporates the moment severe stress enters the picture. And before we unpack the biological and psychological reasons behind this, a quick note for those of you listening for your own professional development. When you take the quiz for today's exploration, you will earn your CBD points.
That's a great bonus.
It is.
Yeah.
So keep an ear out, because understanding the underlying psychology of money is, well, it's absolutely essential right now for anyone advising clients, leading a team, or managing a business.
It really is. And, the disconnect happens because we try to force this mathematical framework onto what is fundamentally an emotional survival mechanism.
An emotional survival mechanism. That's a really interesting way to frame it.
Yeah, when an economic environment becomes volatile, our brains completely alter how they process financial data. The data itself doesn't change, obviously, but the cognitive machinery we use to interpret it, that totally shifts.
And South Africa serves as a really potent real-time case study for this, doesn't it?
Oh, it's the perfect example.
Because if you're operating in this market, you aren't just dealing with normal business cycles. You're managing a unique combination of, like, compounding stressors.
Incident stressors, yeah.
Right. We have relentless, sticky, inflation-eroding purchasing power. We have brutal interest rate hiking cycles. There is wild currency volatility with the rand that makes long-term forecasting just an absolute nightmare.
Not to mention the infrastructure issue.
Exactly. Add in the daily operational disruptions of load shedding and a persistently high unemployment rate, you essentially have a psychological pressure cooker.
That's exactly what it is. It creates a state of chronic cognitive overload.
Cognitive overload.
Yeah, and our mission for this discussion is to really deconstruct exactly why humans predictably abandon rational, data-driven economics for those emotional survival tactics in that kind of pressure cooker environment.
And I guess beyond just understanding the why, we need to look at how you, whether you are a financial professional or a corporate leader, can actually navigate this highly complex psychological terrain.
Exactly. Because to even begin fixing how we make financial decisions, we have to completely shatter the myth that a rand is just a functional unit of exchange.
Right. It's never just about the math.
No, especially in a highly unequal economy. Money represents far more than purchasing power. It is a profound emotional signal.
Meaning it represents, like, security and safety.
Yes, physical safety, dignity, social status, independence. So when the cost of living spikes, the anxiety isn't just about the math of affording groceries. It is an existential threat to a person's sense of self-worth and stability.
Wow. So it hits you on a much deeper level.
At a biological level, actually, an economic threat is processed by the brain very similarly to a physical threat.
Wait, really? Like running from a predator?
Pretty much. When an individual feels that their security is compromised by, say, uncontrolled inflation, the amygdala, which is the brain's threat center, it activates.
Yeah, okay.
And this activation effectively hijacks the prefrontal cortex. That's the area responsible for complex, long-term mathematical planning and rational thought.
So the logic center basically gets shut down.
Exactly. Your analytical capacity is literally marginalized by your brain's evolutionary need to survive the immediate danger.
I think of it like trying to play a highly strategic, high-stakes game of chess. But somebody has triggered a blaring fire alarm right above your head.
Yes, perfect analogy.
And the room is filling with smoke. You aren't going to sit there calmly calculating 5 moves ahead to secure a checkmate.
No, you're not looking at the board at all.
Your brain physically cannot do it. It stops calculating strategy and frantically searches for the nearest exit door.
That fire alarm analogy perfectly illustrates why we see such a massive increase in behavioral biases during economic crises. Because the brain is in fire alarm mode, it relies on evolutionary mental shortcuts.
Like what kind of shortcuts?
Well, loss aversion is a primary example. The psychological pain of losing money feels roughly twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining that exact same amount.
Twice as intense. That's huge.
It is. So under severe stress, clients and consumers become hyperdefensive. They will actively avoid any perceived loss, even if taking a calculated risk is mathematically necessary for their long-term survival.
We see this all the time, don't we? When clients decide to pull their investments and keep everything in cash under the mattress, so to
Like
speak.
good time, yeah.
They think they're avoiding risk, but they're actually guaranteeing a loss because inflation is silently eroding that cash.
Precisely. But because the cash feels safe to the amygdala, the brain just ignores the math completely.
That is the biological override in action.
It is. And you also see availability bias heavily distorting long-term planning.
Availability bias. Remind me how that one works.
This occurs when our brains give disproportionate weight to recent, highly dramatic events simply because they are easily recalled.
Oh, right. Like reading a terrifying headline.
Exactly. If the news cycle has been dominating your feed with stories of currency collapse or grid failure, your brain projects that worst-case scenario infinitely into the future.
So you think it's always going to be this bad?
Right. You end up forecasting your entire retirement based on yesterday's panic, completely ignoring decades of historical data showing market resilience.
Which naturally leads into present bias, I'd imagine. If your brain thinks the world is falling apart today, why would you plan for 10 years from now?
Exactly. Present bias is that overwhelming preference for immediate relief over a strategic future benefit.
The evolutionary mechanism makes sense, right? If there's a tiger outside the cave, you eat the berries today rather than saving them for winter.
Yes, but in modern finance, prioritizing a quick fix over a sustainable strategy is incredibly destructive.
So how does this internal neurological state translate directly into external behavior, like at the shops or with our credit cards?
If you want to see present bias and loss aversion playing out in real time, you just have to look at shifting consumer behavior at the retail level. It's really clear in household debt structures, too.
What are we seeing there?
Well, consumers currently experiencing this cognitive overload exhibit a fascinating duality. On one hand, you have the rapid onset of a scarcity mindset.
Meaning they stop spending.
Basically, brand loyalty evaporates almost overnight. Consumers become hyper-focused on extreme value and absolute essentials. They scrutinize every single purchase because they perceive a severe threat to their resources.
This is where I want to introduce some nuance, though.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the scarcity mindset mathematically. But if we look at the data, we also see massive surges in compensatory or emotional spending.
Yes, the revenge spending.
Exactly. You see consumers who are supposedly terrified of inflation turning around and booking premium holidays or buying luxury electronics.
It seems completely backward, doesn't it?
I really struggle to reconcile those two things.
Mm-hmm.
If a consumer is genuinely anxious about load shedding destroying their income, why on earth are they going on a revenge spending spree?
It's a great question.
Shouldn't the amygdala be forcing them to aggressively hoard every cent?
From a purely mathematical standpoint, yes, it is contradictory. But neurologically, it makes perfect sense when you factor in emotional exhaustion.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Compensatory spending is not about acquiring a product. It is about acquiring a dopamine hit. It's a psychological coping mechanism to regain a fleeting sense of autonomy.
Oh, because everything else feels out of control.
Exactly. When your daily life feels heavily restricted by macroeconomic forces entirely outside of your control, like global supply chains, interest rates, the power grid, buying an experience or a premium item, acts as an emotional release valve.
It's like a temporary rebellion.
Yes. It temporarily overrides the scarcity mindset to provide the illusion of normalcy and control.
So they aren't buying the luxury item because they think they can afford it.
Yeah.
They are buying it to medicate the stress of not being able to afford anything else.
That is precisely what's happening.
That fundamentally changes how you have to look at consumer data. And I imagine this dual behavior completely fragments how people handle their debt, too.
Oh, the mechanisms behind debt behavior reflect this exact same split.
So you have people taking on way too much and people avoiding it entirely.
Spot on. On one side of the spectrum, you have consumers leaning heavily into present bias through products like buy now, pay later schemes or unsecured personal loans.
Using credit as a short-term coping mechanism.
Right. They prioritize the immediate relief of fulfilling a need today while completely disassociating from the long-term reality of the interest rates tomorrow.
They are essentially taking out a mortgage on their future stability just to lower the volume of the fire alarm today.
That's a great way to put it. But then you have the other extreme.
The people who become completely paralyzed.
Yes, extreme debt avoidance. Some individuals become so terrified of structural commitment during uncertainty that they aggressively freeze all major financial decisions.
So they don't buy the house or the car.
Right. They abandon plans to finance a vehicle, upgrade their business equipment, or enter the property market.
Which feels safe to them.
It does. While avoiding debt feels prudent to the individual, when an entire demographic freezes up like that, it stalls economic mobility and harms broader market liquidity.
And then you have what I consider the ultimate avoidance behavior. If you are listening to this, you have likely seen this in your clients or perhaps experienced it yourself, the absolute dread of checking your bank balance.
Oh, the ostrich effect.
Yes. People will literally delete their banking apps or just ignore communications from their financial institutions.
The financial stress becomes so overwhelming that individuals actively dodge information. The brain calculates that the immediate emotional relief of not knowing the exact extent of the damage is preferable to the psychological pain of confronting the numbers.
Even though they know ignoring it makes it worse.
Logically, they know ignoring the problem compounds the interest and makes it worse, but the amygdala prioritizes avoiding the immediate emotional pain.
Let's scale this up, though. If an individual brain behaves this irrationally over a grocery bill or a credit card statement, what happens when millions of those same emotionally exhausted brains look at their life savings or their corporate investment portfolios?
That is where it gets really dangerous.
Because the stakes are infinitely higher in the financial markets, but the biological hardware making the decisions is exactly the same.
When you scale that individual anxiety up to the macro level, you get immense, unpredictable market volatility. When markets dip, investors frequently misinterpret normal short-term fluctuations as permanent structural losses.
They panic.
Complete panic. The amygdala sees the red line on the graph, triggers the panic response, and investors liquidate their portfolios at the absolute worst possible time.
Converting a temporary dip into a permanent loss.
Exactly. They lock in that loss, driven entirely by emotional pressure rather than strategic asset allocation.
And they aren't making these panic decisions in a vacuum either. If I'm an investor feeling anxious, I am immediately going online to see what everyone else is doing.
And there we have herd behavior. It becomes the dominant market force.
Because everyone else is panicking too.
Right. When uncertainty peaks, relying on your own independent, rational analysis feels uniquely dangerous. Evolutionary psychology dictates that there is safety in numbers.
So you follow the crowd.
Yes. Investors turn to social media sentiment and informal online communities to gauge the environment. If the prevailing narrative is panic, the biological instinct to join the stampede and sell off assets is incredibly difficult to resist.
Even for seasoned professionals, I bet.
Oh, absolutely. No one is immune to it.
Which completely redefines the role of the financial advisor then. If you are advising clients right now, it sounds like your job is less about being a human calculator and far more about being a sports psychologist.
That is a brilliant comparison.
Like, you don't hire a physical trainer just to hand you a spreadsheet of exercises. You hire them to stand next to you and talk you out of dropping the weights when the routine gets overwhelmingly painful.
The role has fundamentally shifted in exactly that way. Technical competence, knowing tax efficiency, portfolio construction, and market analytics is merely the baseline requirement now.
It's expected, but it's not enough.
No, it's not. What clients actually need from a professional during an economic crisis is behavioral coaching. An advisor's primary value is acting as an emotional buffer between the client and the relentless media noise.
You literally have to manage the client's neurological state before you can even discuss managing their money.
Exactly that. You have to regulate the anxiety first. And this introduces a profound ethical responsibility for the professional.
In what way?
Well, when clients are vulnerable and highly reactive, professionals must utilize constructive framing. They must acknowledge the macroeconomic risks without resorting to fear-based selling to push specific financial products.
Oh, right. Don't exploit their panic.
Exactly. Furthermore, hiding behind unnecessarily complex industry jargon only serves to alienate the client further, compounding their anxiety.
You have to speak their language.
The objective is to empathetically empower the client to remain anchored to their long-term strategy, rather than exploiting their short-term panic for a quick commission.
And this ripple effect touches every layer of the economy. If you are a business leader, an HR professional, or a policymaker listening to this, You are tasked with managing a workforce and a society experiencing this exact same cognitive overload.
It's a huge challenge.
So how do corporations adapt to this shifting consumer psychology?
Walking that line is the defining challenge for marketers and business strategists today. Because consumers are highly risk-averse and value-conscious, businesses actively deploy behavioral economics to maintain engagement.
What does that look like in practice?
They utilize social proof, highlighting reviews, and community adoption to signal safety to the anxious consumer.
To make them feel like part of the herd.
Exactly. They use anchoring, presenting a high original price next to a discounted price, to alter the perception of value. And they bundle products to reduce the cognitive fatigue of making multiple purchasing decisions.
I see businesses using these tactics constantly, but it raises a genuine question about where we draw the line between assistance and exploitation.
It's a very fine line.
Like, if I'm online shopping for essential goods, and the retailer places a prominent ticking countdown clock next to a discount, is that a helpful nudge to save me money? Or is that just a business intentionally weaponizing my inflation anxiety to force an immediate conversion?
It is a precarious ethical boundary. Using aggressive scarcity cues, like a countdown clock, during a period of documented economic hardship can very easily cross the line into psychological exploitation.
Because it triggers the fire alarm.
Yes, it artificially induces the fire alarm state in the consumer's brain to bypass their rational budgeting.
Which works for a quick sale. Right.
It does, but responsible corporate leadership recognizes that while weaponizing behavioral biases might drive a spike in short-term conversions, it fundamentally destroys long-term brand equity.
Because eventually the customer realizes they were played.
Exactly. Once the consumer's emotional state regulates, they realize they were manipulated. In an uncertain economy, consumer trust is a brand's most critical, non-renewable asset.
That makes a lot of sense. And corporate leaders have to look internally, too. It isn't just the external consumer who is stressed. It is their own workforce.
This is a huge, huge issue right now.
If your employees are losing sleep over interest rate hikes and electricity costs, that has to bleed into their professional output.
The cognitive toll of that stress directly impacts organizational resilience. Human beings have a finite amount of working memory.
Like RAM in a computer.
Exactly. If a significant portion of an employee's mental bandwidth is constantly occupied by chronic financial worry, there is physically less bandwidth available for complex problem-solving, innovation, or client service at work.
So they just can't perform at their best.
This manifests as reduced cognitive performance, a sharp increase in operational errors, severe burnout, and rising absenteeism.
Which explains why progressive HR departments are integrating robust financial wellness programs. It is no longer just a soft corporate perk. It is a critical risk management strategy.
That's exactly how they should be viewing it.
By providing your team with budgeting infrastructure, access to advisors, or debt restructuring support, you are literally buying back the cognitive capacity of your workforce.
You are protecting your operational output. And if we zoom out to the highest level, policymakers face the unique challenge of mitigating this behavior across entire populations.
That must be incredibly difficult.
It is. When an entire society is operating with an elevated amygdala, you risk catastrophic herd behavior like nationwide panic buying of fuel or essential goods based on a single unverified rumor.
We've definitely seen that happen.
Policymakers must manage public confidence, which is an incredibly fragile asset.
But how do you mathematically model policy for a population that is acting emotionally? I mean, you can't just legislate away human anxiety.
No, you can't. So policymakers have to utilize structural nudges.
Structural nudges.
Yes, a nudge is a concept in behavioral economics where you design the environment or the choice architecture to naturally guide citizens toward a better outcome without restricting their freedom of choice.
So you're leveraging human psychology rather than fighting it.
Exactly.
What does a large-scale structural nudge actually look like in practice?
The most thoroughly documented example is the automatic default setting for national or corporate pension schemes.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, if a system relies on citizens to proactively request the forms, navigate the complex jargon, and voluntarily deduct money from their current paycheck for retirement, present bias guarantees massive underparticipation.
Right, because of present bias, people will just delay it indefinitely.
Yes. However, if the policy mandates that every employee is automatically enrolled in a pension fund by default, and they must proactively complete paperwork to opt out, participation rates skyrocket.
Oh, wow. So you are taking their natural human inertia, this tendency to just do nothing,
Sure.
and turning it into an asset rather than a liability.
Exactly. If they do nothing, they save for retirement.
You also see this with simplified tax compliance pathways, right?
Exactly. By reducing the cognitive load required to understand tax obligations or access social grants, compliance and engagement improve exponentially.
Because people are all already overwhelmed.
Right. When a population is deeply stressed, bureaucratic complexity is the absolute enemy of action. If the process requires high cognitive bandwidth, an exhausted population simply will not engage with it.
Bringing all these layers together. I
Mhm.
mean, the biology of the brain, the behavior at the checkout counter, the panic in the investment markets, and the structural design of our corporations, it forces us to completely redefine what it means to be financially resilient.
It really does.
We place so much emphasis on financial literacy. We train people to understand compound interest, to analyze balance sheets, to build complex forecasting models. But knowing the cold math is utterly insufficient on its own.
Financial literacy is merely the foundational layer. It is necessary, but wholly insufficient without psychological capability.
Psychological capability, I like that term.
True resilience requires acute behavioral awareness. You must develop the introspective capacity to recognize your own emotional triggers.
So, understanding how your own brain reacts under pressure.
Yes. You need to know what your specific neurological response to stress looks like. When inflation spikes, do you immediately hoard cash? Do you seek dopamine through revenge spending? Do you succumb to the ostrich effect and ignore your data?
You have to map out your own biases and vulnerabilities in a calm state, long before the macroeconomic fire alarm starts blaring.
Precisely. Whether you are an individual attempting to build an emergency liquidity buffer, a financial professional trying to talk a terrified client out of liquidating their life savings, or an executive designing a remuneration structure for an anxious workforce, the governing principle remains constant.
Which is?
We must design strategies and systems for how human beings actually behave in all their messy emotional reality, rather than how theoretical economic models dictate they should behave.
We have to design for humanity, not for the spreadsheet. As we wrap up today's session, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to apply to your own life and professional practice. Think back to your most recent significant financial decision. Perhaps it was a major capital purchase, a substantial pivot in your investment allocation, or taking on a new liability. If you strip away the justifications and are truly brutally honest with yourself, was that decision genuinely driven by the empirical data on the page? Or was it driven by a hidden psychological need to manufacture a sense of control in an inherently chaotic world? Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time.